The Department of Justice announced yesterday that the U.S. Army's first ever transgender officer has been indicted for trying to provide confidential health records to someone he believed to be a Russian agent. And today, we're just trying to make sense of the shocking news. Who could have possibly foreseen that a severely mentally ill man might do something unusual and disordered? It just doesn't add up. A man who thinks that he is a lady got confused about which country he is supposed to be serving. It's a regular man bites dog kind of story. That word service keeps coming back to me because while now, ever since the Obama administration, the U.S. military has become a place of entitlement for people with all sorts of circumstances that make them less than fit for the battlefield, it was not always that way. In the way back olden days of about a decade ago, the U.S. military was an institution dedicated to service, not to affirmative action, not to the affirmation of delusion, service. Tough guys signing up to sacrifice to protect the rest of us. Now that dynamic has flipped, not just in the military, but throughout virtually all of our institutions. An inversion that has already led to far greater disorder than a man in a dress. On the civilian side of things, putting the military aside for a second, on the civilian side of things, Virgin Airlines has just made a big announcement. They've got a big dress code change for their stewardesses, and now stewards, I guess, also in the airline, because, well, it's a little confusing, I guess, because now the stewards can dress like the stewardesses and the stewardesses can dress like the stewards. Virgin announces, we've changed our uniform code to give our crew, pilot, and ground teams the option to choose which of our iconic uniforms designed by Vivienne Westwood best represents them. That was a Freudian slip because now the uniforms are going to be ironic rather than iconic because the men are going to dress like ladies and vice versa. My first reaction when hearing this announcement, do you remember when the service industry was about serving customers? Do you remember that? That was a long time ago. I've worked in the service industry before. I've worked in restaurants, I've worked catering, I've worked in fast food, and call me old-fashioned. When I was coming up in those jobs, the point was to give the customer what the customer wanted. The customer was always right. Your job in the service industry is to make the customer feel more comfortable, feel better. I do not want to see some husky, deluded man wearing a skirt on my flight. I never fly Virgin anyway, but if I were to fly Virgin, I mean, it's a completely failing airline. This is probably some last gasp, desperate effort to save their stock. But if I did ever find myself on one of those airplanes, I would not want to see some husky, confused dude prancing around pretending to be a chick. I don't like that as the customer. Now you might say, well, what about the stewardess or steward? Or I don't care. My job is not to accommodate them. Their job is to accommodate me as the customer. And then when I'm working in the service industry, my job is to accommodate my customers. Okay? I remember I was working a catering job many years ago. And the manager who was running the shop, he said, okay, I remember, guys, what is this all about? What are we all doing here? What's the purpose of this job? And in my mind, I thought, I don't know, to make a little bit of money and then go home. But no, that's the consequence of it. Sure, I guess that's why we wake up and go to work to some degree. We got to feed ourselves, put a roof over our head. But what is the purpose of that industry? The purpose of that industry is to serve the customer. And we've totally inverted that now. Now it's all about making the service people feel good about themselves. And it's true in the military too. The military, which was all about sacrifice, and you sign up and you put yourself in danger and you don't get paid very much and you don't get good food and you don't get to sleep very well. And it's just hard. It's a really hard job. But you do that because you are serving the public. And now what do we hear from the military? Well, it's my right. As a transsexual, gay, lesbian, this, that, the other thing, it's my right to serve in combat. No, it's not your right. The military is not about your rights at all. You sign your rights away when you join the military. At least you're supposed to. It's supposed to be about sacrificing other people. But we can't think that way anymore. Our cult of selfishness, which you saw led by the left, But it has not exactly been resisted by the right either. The right has embraced its own version of the cult of selfishness. Greed is good. Money at all costs. Wolf of Wall Street kind of Ayn Rand style right-wingedness in America. It's just the flip side of that kind of selfishness, the individualism, the incessant focus on my rights and entitlements. It's everyone in America has kind of bought into this, but no one's benefiting from it. It hasn't led to a flourishing country. It's just led to a selfish country where no one's serving anybody else, and then everybody's miserable. Speaking of refusing to serve, an amazing story in the Washington Post about someone who works for the Department of Child Services. And I guess it's a she, but she now identifies as a he. And so the Washington Post calls her he, and the WAPO says, he came out as trans. Then Texas had him investigate the parents of trans kids. And this confused lady who dresses like a man was very upset by this because the Texas governor came out and said, look, it is child abuse when parents try to convince their little sons that they're daughters and daughters that they're sons, and especially when they take them to doctors to pump them full of hormones and chop off their body parts. It's a child abuse, and it might not even be an intentional child abuse, but it is. Parents can abuse their kids without knowing it or without necessarily desiring to, but it can happen, and so we're not going to let that happen in Texas anymore. The voters of Texas support this initiative. But what about this lady? This very confused lady, this mentally ill lady who thinks that she's a man, says, well, I don't want to execute on that order. So she goes on a couple of these calls and she's crying and she's saying, this is wrong, this is terrible, but I have to do it, but I'm sorry. You're a wonderful family that's trying to trans all your kids, but I'm so sorry. And then finally she quits. That's the happy ending to the story. She should quit. She shouldn't be in this job in the first place. She has no right to this job. She has no right to deny the orders of her boss, ultimately her boss, the governor. She has no right to deny the desires of the people of Texas, who still have, to some degree at least, have the right to self-government. So she resigned, as well she should. That is good. This is political power. We should pressure to resign or fire outright all of the bureaucrats in the public sector and in the private sector who don't want to carry out, who don't want to abide by the laws that we pass as the political community. That's a great thing. That is political power. Now, you might be a little cautious about this and say, well, gosh, that sounds an awful lot like cancel culture. It does. Yes. All cultures cancel, as I've said for a long time. All cultures have standards. And so the question is, are we going to wield political power for bad ends, like transing the kids and abusing people and denying the will of voters in our sacred democracy? Are we going to do that? Or are we going to wield political power to good ends, like protecting kids and saving little babies and having a good country and protecting our country and living in a flourishing society? What is it? Which are we going to do? I'm for the latter. Call me crazy. Call me a far-right radical extremist. I think that we should wield just political power to improve things and protect good things rather than to do the opposite. The rest of the show is continuing now. You do not want to miss it because I'm about to be electrocuted by David Cohn. If you are not a member, click the link in the description and join us. We'll see you over there.